Hello, everyone. Welcome to Love is Remedy with your hosts, Diego Rodriguez, Erin, Mikkel Dvorak. And if you've been following, you know that I always mispronounce the last name, which is great. And then my full name is Diego Albino Rodriguez Contreras. We're really excited because today we are going to be wrapping up season 1 of our podcast. And it has been an adventure. This episode is all about a recap. We're going to keep it to about 30 minutes. And our goal, beyond just recapping, is also just to talk about what we learned, takeaways, and what the future holds for Love is a Remedy. With that, Erin, how are you doing today?
Hi, Diego. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be talking about this whole experience with you. And it's been almost a year and a half, 2 years since I messaged you and asked you if this was a stupid idea. I think that was, I get a lot of ideas in my head, and I most of the time think they're probably not that great. And so I bounce them off people, and you said it's a great idea. Let's do it. Yeah,
I do think it is a great idea, was a great idea, will be a great idea. And as a quick aside, we're on a different platform than what we're used to. We've done primarily in-person recording with cameras in the room. And today I am in Los Angeles, California, and you are in the Phoenix, Arizona area.
That's right.
We have decided to use this new platform. So for anyone wondering, this is possibly the platform we'll be using into the foreseeable future. We are excited about it because we can be anywhere. I can be wherever I'm going to be at. Same with Erin. And it allows us to have some flexibility as well with our guests. The last time that we filmed, we were all here in LA, actually in the same place that I'm at right now, which was fun and amazing. And since we want to get more content, we're considering using this platform. So just wanted to talk about that really briefly.
Thanks, Diego. Thank you.
No problem. So do you want to get into the questions?
Yeah, so for our audience, we're going to, Diego and I are going to recap the year, ask each other a few questions, and that'll be it. And it's a little more informal today, but still a lot of fun. So, Diego, what is your first question?
Okay, the first question for you is, Erin, recap the last year and a half. Why did we start this project anyway, and where are we now?
I mean, I had the idea because I was heartbroken. I was what I thought was it was a breakup. I was in a breakup, and I was heartbroken, and I was having a lot of conversations with friends. It was right. I think right. We were COVID was really fresh, I think, and people were. I think that COVID did a lot of things, and one of the things that COVID did was make people do some self-searching, some deep thinking about their lives, their relationships. And I think it either brought people closer or broke people up, or brought a lot to the surface that people needed to deal with, reflect on internally within themselves. And so those were the kind of conversations that I was having. I think you and I were having some of those conversations, and I wanted to bring those conversations to a platform because I thought that it would be helpful. I thought other people could just listen in, hear stories, hear what we were already talking about. Everybody was there was a lot of loneliness going on at the time with COVID, and people were still uncertain about the world and how it was going to, how COVID was going to impact the world when I had this original idea. And so I wanted to connect with people in this platform, and I just wanted to have the conversations online with and invite people in to the conversations that I was already having with my friends that I think are really interesting people. But ultimately, this podcast was born out of heartache because I wanted to talk about not just the light side of love and the beautiful side of it, but what love actually really is, and how it does force us to transform in a way. It can be very powerful, and it can be thrilling, and it also can be really difficult. And when I say difficult, I'm just talking about how when we're in any kind of a relationship, when we're trying to be loving, most often in my life, I see how much I fall short of the ability to do that. So then what do? We have to go to the source of love, which I believe is God. God is love, the source, to learn not only how to experience that with a real experience with God and pursue it there, so that it can then flow out into our relationships. And that just seems like a lifelong lesson. And that's why I wanted to have this podcast. I wanted to talk about all those themes and do it through talking with you, Diego, but also through bringing guests on who have their own unique stories of how life and the paradigms they were working in and living within shattered. And then there's these moments that God comes in, and what do people do after that? How do they put their lives back together? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. I think that's a terrific response. Also, as a quick note, you can full screen yourself if you're answering the question, right? With the
Yes.
Just not saying that you have to do it every time, just observing.
Okay.
You can do for those watching the video. Yeah, that sounds exciting. And just as a quick sort of piggyback on some of those ideas you brought up, now I'm full screen. Okay. The timing was such that I also was out of a breakup, and so it was an interesting opportunity to share a lot of this stuff. I've also been a part of small men's group in the past, and those groups have been great. Those experiences are all about critical thinking, and I really liked, Erin, that you were interested in having some critical thought around certain pre-existing ideas. And as you know, I love to analyze everything and anything. So it provided an interesting space to explore aspects of day-to-day living that within the secular world or within perhaps like a societal sort of construct, you have to think through your behavior, your choices, and reactions to certain behavior. Given that we've talked about this before, but that I'm always feeling an outsider in culture, I found it like a really refreshing opportunity to engage in these ideas and to engage in how you create your own sense of the world through agency, human agency. So overall, yeah, I thought it was cool and I really enjoyed it. Okay, let's move on to the second question. What have you learned the most from doing this podcast so far, Erin?
What have I learned the most? That it's a lot of work that people don't realize. And it's worth it, but these podcasts take some time and energy to figure out, especially when people have other jobs and careers and kids and people in their lives that, keep us busy. So it takes a lot of work. And that's just logistically what I've learned about doing this production wise. But also, in looking back at the guests that we actually had on and some of the themes that you and I started to talk about in the beginning, which was masculinity and femininity and how that plays out in relationship. And the ideal version of that, and how most of us are, it just seems like that it's just a difficult thing to figure out. But when I go back to the guests that we've interviewed, what have I learned most? Seems like we had all men on that we interviewed, except for when you interviewed me. So we got to get some women on here to talk about some other things. But at least in season 1, what I noticed was that these men had all hit a pivotal moment in their life where the template that they were living in shattered, or I guess, is that the right word? The paradigm, the template, whatever, that they were living within shattered. They hit the wall, their life fell apart, crumbled. Each of them has a different way to explain this experience. One of our guests said it felt like he just smashed into a steel wall and everything shattered. Another guest felt like he felt like he disintegrated, his whole being disintegrated. And it just seems like what I thought was pretty interesting was that men are dealing with a lot. I think women are as well, but I just noticed that men are dealing with a lot and hiding a lot. And I think that is part of the dynamic, the struggle with men and women. And I'm specifically speaking of the framework with men and women relationships. And I want to know more, and I want more men to talk about that struggle and why and how, more men can figure out, I don't know, what we can do to help. And that just seems to be something that I learned, in sitting back, I'm just learning that, I mean, you kind of know this before, but more than ever, like, men are hiding. They're hiding behind a facade. And that's just what I learned back on our guests.
Yeah.
It makes me sad because women want our men to be real. I don't know. I do. Maybe I don't speak for all women. I don't know what all women want, honestly. But I think to me, it's particularly not interesting when someone is obviously living according to a facade that they've decided to live within, and I can see through it. And it to me, it's just, I don't believe that it serves that person. I believe that it must be awful inside to have to live that way. And I would love for men to have a different experience. That was me, and I didn't put myself main in front and center.
It's okay. Yeah, well, I didn't think you would. I presume you're going to keep it in the two-shot, which is totally fine.
Okay. I'm learning how to do this production side of things, by the way. But yeah.
Well,
what did you learn the most?
Right before I answer that, I have to make a quick note.
Okay.
This part of the first question was, where are we now? Oh, I love, here we got my close-up. So where are we now? I think it's worth noting that we both began this journey in Denver, Colorado, and I am now living in Los Angeles, California, and you're living in the Phoenix, Arizona area. I just think that's an interesting phenomenon that occurred for both of us. We lifted up everything and essentially uprooted our own existences during the production of this project, and we have different lifestyles as a consequence of it. I moved because I am pursuing a career in filmmaking, and I'd like to be able to do larger scale productions. I had felt like I had gotten to a point in Denver where I had, for the most part, leveled up to the most that I could level up my character. And I was just keen to figure out how to get to the next level. I want to make feature length films as well as television programming. So I had to be in LA. You moving to the Phoenix area is its own reason, but I presume career perhaps played a role, perhaps not.
Intuition.
Yeah, no, in my world, like my experience, I had a sense that I had to be out here no later than June 22nd of last year. I was meditating a lot and praying a lot, and it was like June 22nd. And I knew basically as soon as COVID went down that I needed to leave Denver. I could just like, ding, I just felt it. And then I had about a year to prepare. So those who were close to me, I told them that I was going to leave and to go to LA. And I think most people were aware I was going to do it. I've been talking about it for a while. So that's where we are now. It's been quite a journey. So that's question number one, recapping that. Okay. And then two, I can answer this as well. What have you learned, Diego, the most from doing this podcast so far? I have learned to just sit with things, and that a lot of life is just sitting with things that are difficult. I like to solve things quickly. I like to solve problems, and I often look at the world as a complex calculus problem, that if I work on it quickly enough, I can derive simplicity through it and distill it to its most sort of key parts and act on that. And through that distillation process, be incredibly efficient and eventually memorize formulas that I can just pop in, use templates that allow me to sort of be more on autopilot and find efficiencies of thought, communication, being in relationships, being in business, being in everything. So that's, I think, what I'm kind of wanting to do. The podcast has taught me the importance of really just being still with the processing and the discomfort of that. Because as we talked about, Erin, in situations, and it's hard to generalize for all women, but in some situations where there's conflicts between men and women, sometimes a woman just wants you to be there. Just be present. Don't try to fix the thing, just be present. And you hear that all the time, but that's important. And then just in life, just don't check out, just like be present and be. So that's
how did the podcast teach you that? Doing this podcast, how did it teach you that?
Well, that's all this podcast is. We're just like being still and giving space and time to the things in our lives that we want to rush through. There's a disagreement with your partner, rush through it. There's something going on, rush. Don't think, just like manic, text, ignore, turn off phone, go to a concert, do something, go, whatever it is that you want to do. The idea is don't be present, get out, run, escape, flee, avoid, whatever, for both sides, men, women, and so forth. And that is really rewarded through a lot of mechanisms in day-to-day life. And I wouldn't say even, it's easy to fault social media. I would say even prior to social media, we just have no incentive to do that. So all the work that we've been doing has been reflecting, curating, critiquing, assessing, all about just doing heavy work, deep work. And that takes just being still. So that's how the podcast taught me that.
And how many times did we almost quit this podcast?
I think we almost quit it before we recorded today. So
almost. There was other times too.
Countless times. Well, it's an undertaking. It's an undertaking to do something that you love. It's an undertaking to be open and vulnerable and share every little thing and be afraid of how are people going to react. And some of the people who've watched the podcast so far have given me positive feedback. I'm sure there's other people who have not shared things with me. Maybe the feedback is not as positive. So that's tough. It's tough to open up to everybody and nobody at the same time.
Right.
Because you don't know if anyone's listening. Obviously they are, but it's also a little anxiety inducing to be this vulnerable and open with people who you may never meet or you haven't talked to in years or you hardly talk to. But I think I did it and continue to do it because as a way of processing the stuff, I think that I can articulate things and hopefully, like you were saying, it's certainly beneficial to me. It's a selfish pursuit. And I think it's worthwhile to kind of start altering the social script that is in the past, and through these kinds of conversations, maybe bringing awareness through it all. Then finally, I think bringing a bit of objective truth to a lot of these conversations. I think a lot of what it is that we're really struggling with in some of these dialogues is like the subjective truth versus the objective truth. And you look at existentialism in particular, and that philosophy of Nietzsche and God is dead, and the postmodern movement as a whole, it's like, I am God. Subjective self creates all things. Through my own subjectivity, I can then will my being into the world. And you start seeing how that starts manifesting itself in our society with being able to engineer produce and other things and affect the world to our will. And then a lot of our podcast is trying to think through this idea of objective truth. There is an objective truth. There's an objective truth in that there is a true God. There is a finite reality. And there is a sandbox that is limited, and it's not to the individual, it's to the objective truth. And that tension between subjectivity and objectivity is, I think, the core tension we have in our society right now in terms of political issues. And so our podcast allows us to start to assess those things. And Erin, you've disappeared. I just see a ghost version of you.
Wait, you can't see me?
I cannot. No Erin there for the audience. It's still no Erin.
Well, darn it. Can you hear me?
I can hear a screen with no Erin. Do you have your video on?
Yes.
Okay, there was something. Never mind. Okay.
I can see myself.
Yeah, I can't see. I wonder if you stopped broadcasting yourself.
No.
Can you see me now?
No.
Okay. Well, I turned my video on and off. I don't know if that's something you can do.
There, I stopped my video.
Okay.
And now my video is back on.
There you are. Excellent.
Okay. I'm just going to leave it like this and not mess with it.
I think we should, don't. And then I think also we should just release it like this for people to.
That's fine. Why not?
All right. So that is question 2.
Okay.
In the interest of time, we're moving on to 3, which is what value has doing the podcast had in your life? And I'm going to start first just to mix it up. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What value has doing the podcast had in my life? As an anecdote, I was having a really hard time with a client, and there was a lot of miscommunication occurring. I had decided to help out this person. It turned out I wasn't really helping them because of a lot of the miscommunication. And I thought about the work we had done in the podcast, and it helped me to think through what I needed to do and how I needed to move forward in that moment of conflict. My client was a woman, and she was really upset about some things. And there were some things that I knew I couldn't fix and some things I knew I could fix. And because of the podcast, I shifted my perspective on how to try to create a new possibility for this conflict. And a lot of it became influenced by what we talked about, Erin, about accountability and bringing awareness and trying to get through things. And to this day, I don't think that I don't think the client would hire me again, which is okay. And I don't know that I would necessarily be a good fit for them, which is what we learned in the process. At the same time, I'm really grateful, and I hope that the work that I do has a positive impact on their lives. It just made me be accountable to a lot of things that I wasn't even aware that I wasn't being accountable to. And that was really interesting for me because, obviously in relationships, there's a very, in some ways, clear gauge and scope. And sometimes in business relationships, it's not, even though you try to make it really clear, it isn't, especially if you know the person outside of work, it can get vague. So I think it helped me to understand how to take accountability for the entire situation and everything that was going on, and just try to figure it out and fix it, and how to move forward within it. So what value does it have in my life? It's helped me to try to grow up. And I know I need to grow up, and I know that that's an ongoing process. It helped me to mature, I think, and understand how to mature, because sometimes you don't know how to, even though you want to. So I think that's been the values it's helping me, hopefully growing up a little bit. We'll see if it continues to have that impact on me. And it's not to say that I figured everything out, but I think it's been helpful to have some space in my life to reflect on that stuff.
And when you say grow up, like, what do you mean specifically?
What do I mean to say? That's well, I think I'm shifting around my seat because it's such a tough question. I think just trying to mature and create responsibility around implicit expectations and not just explicit expectations.
Interesting.
And finding ways of speaking to those things that maybe one is afraid of speaking to, or I might be afraid of speaking to, and engaging in that stuff. Sometimes what that results in is, though, some relationships don't survive those conversations. I think that that's interesting, because that means that there's a lot of relationships that we probably have in our lives that aren't great, and we have to just keep them going. But I think, at least in my world, it's trying to be willing to have conversations about things. I have a hard time having tough conversations with people, not because I have a hard time opening up. I don't always know the language to engage with those tough things. I'm very, unfortunately, blunt sometimes. I don't know how else to be, and I've tried to be more diplomatic. And so that's been a part of the journey, is growing up in the sense of just trying to think about, like, what impact that I have, that I intend to have, am I actually having? How do I become accountable for those things? How do I resolve those things? How do I be more aware of what commitments I have? I think that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. There's so many more questions I could ask you, but we're trying to focus on a time frame.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that was my response there. Now let's move on to, what value has doing the podcast had in your life?
I mean, I think I'm just echo a little bit about what you're saying. For me, it's just accountability. I don't want to be a hypocrite, and yet it's so easy to be a hypocrite. And there's just when you're asking people to be vulnerable, and people are so generous with themselves and come on and share their story, like their deep stories of difficulty and struggle and bad decisions and things like that. And then here, you can't help but reflect in your own life. And I am always going to be the first person to say that, like, I do not have everything together. And mostly it's because I'm very aware and keenly aware of this, and understand that for me, I know in my life, my purpose is this spiritual journey. And, if I get away from that, I die, and I don't, I don't feel like myself. But also when I'm in it and on it, on the path and inside of it, it's also not the easiest thing either. And it's not, but I am alive. And by alive, I mean, I am constantly being shown. And again, like it echoes that these conversations hold me accountable to it, conversations I have with other people, and just my own desire to be whole and holy and clean and pure, because my dark past and all the things that I've done and been through in my life, I want my mind to grasp onto things that are good. And yet I continue and not going to hold me down. And yet I continue to become more aware of the things that our mind still attaches itself to, at least my mind, and we attach ourselves to things. So it's a constant clean out, I guess, and looking at myself and the things that I am still holding on to that are not absolute truth and not what God would have me to hold on to. And I'm also I continue on that path of this personal experience with God and exploring it. I'm always exploring it and testing it and checking it and seeing if it's real. And it always is. I have lipstick on my teeth. Hold on. And I didn't get my nails done today. But just this last week, I had this beautiful experience where, there's that scripture that God is, I don't know, I'm the worst at quoting scripture because I never can remember the numbers, like where they're found in the scripture. But I did go to a Christian school and they made us memorize a lot of scripture growing up. So I know it's in there, and it just talks about how God is our counselor. And I do see counselors and coaches, and I've gone to healers, and I've done all sorts of things to try to feel better. And those things have worked at different times in my life. But just this last week, it was so neat to experience God as my counselor, just alone. My heart was stirring. And I, like you said earlier, where you take a pause, like sometimes people's hearts are stirring. Well, they'll go and, numb it through different ways, or will, as simple things as just vegging out. I literally spent a lot of time vegging out on the Johnny Depp and the Amber Heard trial in the last month. And I was obsessed with it for my own reasons. And a lot of us were obsessed with it for our own reasons. But now that it's over, I'm like back to my life and kind of reflecting. And so my heart was churning about some things. And I just sat in the quiet in the evening, and the desert nights. I highly recommend desert nights. It's like the most beautiful, and you can get some really beautiful, profound experiences out in the desert. But God, just listening to God and just tuning in and hearing God heal as a counselor and healer, a part of my heart that I didn't recognize still needed to be healed. And so it's not just about having accountability to not be a hypocrite. It's just me now. But it's about also this continuing evolution or awareness of understanding more and more the different attributes of God and how that is truly, it sounds so cliche, but the podcast has made me continue to try to hold myself accountable to not be a hypocrite. Well, I am in many ways still. I have a long ways to go. But in that understanding, continuing to bring God into those areas of my life that need to be healed and having those experiences. And somehow this podcast holds me accountable to all that. You can't run when you're having these conversations with other people. You have to continue to do it yourself. There, how's that?
That's good. Your video is frozen for a little bit, so unfortunately, I was seeing a frozen image, but the audio quality and the content is great, so thank you. Okay, yeah. Moving on. So 4, I'm going to go first again, then I'll mix it up. What's the one thing that stands out the most from one of our guests? That's a really tough one. From one of the guests. I feel like what stands out the most is, and I know the question is one, we did an interview, we ended up not airing it for a number of reasons. I think
with someone else, for the guest.
Right. Yeah. It ended up not being something we shared for a number of reasons. And what stood out to me there is just like how all of our journeys are a work in progress, and also how stories are very powerful. And taking that now for all the guests, I think the power of, and Erin, you had me do this a long time ago, of just kind of rewriting your own history. Not that you can truly, but just, do you remember when you had me in a journaling writing class write my timeline and my own timeline? Anyway, years ago, we took a journal writing class in like 2013 in April, and you just suggested, hey, you should put your timeline down. So I think just owning your narrative in a way and trying to make sense of the events that happen in your life, not artificially recreating things, but just trying to figure out what happened, like sort it out. And I think having the space to edit is interesting, because we're in the medium of video. And so a medium like this, you can't edit and re-edit. And in a way, it's good to do that for your own life, just to sift through what happened. Obviously, again, grounding it in reality. So I think what stood out to me the most was how our journeys are never complete, and the power of editing, and also the danger of editing too, right? Like if you can get too hung up on trying to re-edit or edit your own life because of a bad event, you're almost doing yourself a disservice. It's almost like you have to engage with the thing that was terrible and let it be, so that it is, and so that you can grow from it. So that's not one thing, but things that stand out. Okay, Erin, what about you? What's the one thing that stands out the most from one of our guests?
Well, we had I'm super thankful for my family members who were the first people that were open to being interviewed. And one thing that my dad said that stood out, which, he said, if you don't deal with, what did he say? Something like, if you don't deal with the demons in your basement, they'll come out at some point. What did he say? Something like that. So it's basically, if we don't take the time to do this reflection and confession and processing and getting these things out, then that dysfunction and those choices that we make and those behaviors and just that suffering that we continue to create in our own hearts and minds and soul, it'll just continue. And at some point, you'll come face to face with them, whether you like it or not, I think is the gist of what he was saying. And I thought that was wise, because he's in his 70s and he had to do that in the last many years of his life. The things that he had been running from in his whole life, caused him to come to a crashing halt. And I thought that was something to really listen to and pay attention to. And a lot of times we don't always know where to go or feel safe, or we're like, we don't have the tools to do it. And so hopefully this platform, if 1 or 5 people see it, we'll be like, well, they're talking about it. Maybe there's some resources out there. And there are. And you have to keep at it. You have to keep pursuing it and pursuing it. If one thing doesn't seem right, doesn't feel like a good fit, find something else, because it's your own life and it's worth it. And that was a little bit of a tangent, but the answer to the question was what my dad said.
Great. For me, I'll answer the question as well. How is the podcast?
No, one guest.
Oh, one guest. Sorry. Moving on, I should say. So let's move on to the second one, or the last one, actually. This is, how has this podcast or anything in your life in the last year and a half transformed you? Erin, kick it off. Tell us how.
How does it transform me? Yeah. I had the answer to this and I forgot. How has it transformed me? I don't know that it's transformed me. I know that it's helped me. I know that more than anything, it's held me accountable, like I mentioned earlier. And it's not about the conversations. It's about the moments where it really matters, where these themes and these ideas that we are discussing are actually played out in relationship. And I just constantly fail. And that's really, it's not transformative. It's just like an awareness of like, wow, I'm really, I really still have a lot to learn and a lot to go through and grow, but I really am growing and changing and cleaning out. And I think, I don't really have a good answer. It's just a matter of, are you there?
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm focused on what you're saying. I often do that. I'm like,
you're just like, I think for me, it's just more of just awareness of those moments that I am not engaging the way that would be beneficial for myself or anybody around me, and just having the awareness of taking that moment captive in the best way that I can, thinking through, calming down, working through. And it's just, that's hard work when you're someone who's very passionate like I am and who has a lot to say when they're upset.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on you keep talking. You answer the question.
Okay.
And I'm going to put you on main, but I got to plug my computer in so it doesn't die. All this text.
Fine. Yeah, no, all good. Okay. So I'll try to wrap this up as well quickly. How has this podcast or anything in your life in the last year and a half transformed you? See, that was the other part of the question though, Erin, is anything in your life transformed you? Year and a half. Oh gosh. I used to think a year and a half was so long. A year and a half now seems so short. I think that the biggest thing that's transformed me has been therapy. I've been doing therapy. I've been in therapy before, and I was in therapy on and off, and I've done a lot of coaching sessions, but I really dug into it during the pandemic. And I think the way that it's transformed me is just to be more present with my feelings and processing them and just owning them and not being so, I guess, willing to self-abandon for people, you know? I think in my family dynamic, I, being the oldest, have and continue to have a lot of expectations to sort of, which I do want to do whatever you can to support your family. There's a point at which it becomes detrimental for your mental health, emotional health, spiritual health. So I think that what's transformed me is just therapy, because it's allowed me to start trying to figure out what I need to own and not own, and what I need to stand for and not change, which is hard because I think a lot of times the relationships I've had have been built around me being fairly accommodating. I'm a fairly accommodating person and fairly agreeable as well. So I think trying to find ways where it's clear that it's hurtful to me and trying to acknowledge when those relationships are no longer functional, and then trying to bring awareness where there is dysfunction and seeing if there is a way to work on them. And sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes people just aren't ready for that kind of work. So I feel like that's been a big part of it, is just trying to figure out where that's at with different people, different relationships. And it's not always easy. It can lead to conflict, and I don't like conflict. So yeah, I think that's what's transformed me, has just been consistently being in therapy over the last now 2 years.
That's what's transformed you in the last.
Yeah, well, you know, the podcast is part of that in a way.
Well, I want to ask you, has anything changed? So when we first started chatting, we talked a lot about intuition. And has anything changed in the last year and a half with your understanding of your own intuition and how that guides your life?
No, I mean, I want to say something clever and poignant. I can just say, just always listen to it. And it's going to hurt. And this is something my therapist and I talked about, but it's going to hurt. And basically it's going to be difficult. And just because your intuition tells you it's the right thing to do doesn't mean it's going to be hurt. It's going to be good and not hurtful. It could hurt. It could be painful. It could still not work out the way that you want. And yet you're generally still better off listening to it, even if you don't understand it, even if it's not easy to make sense with. So, yeah.
And you really correlate your intuition with the voice of God, basically, in your own life. You meditate and you believe that your intuition is, guided by God.
Oh, that's a hard one. I don't know. I mean, I hope so. I pray that it is.
But we have so many chats about this to make sure we're being guided, because people who are intuitive have to be so careful to not be guided by other spirits that are not.
But also, how overzealous would I be to say that, yes, God himself is speaking to me and being like, Diego, left, right. You know what I mean? Like, I think that the way I look at it is we have all these resources, our knowledge, our rationale, our logic, all these things come from God. Our hearts, we're created in God's image. all of those things come from God, and so does intuition. So for me, I go, it's another aspect, another tool set. And I've done a lot of things in the last year that were heavily guided by my intuition. And generally it worked out. Generally it was right. Does that mean it was perfect and flawless and it was like the secret sauce that made my life beautiful without suffering? No, it's been difficult. I've cried a lot. I've called you many times upset. I've texted you. It's been really challenging, but I really want what I want. So I have to use the best resources I have. And my intuition is among the best tools I have to navigate the world. So.
Yeah. And I'm not challenging that. I'm just so curious about it because I've always questioning my intuition, but most of the time
I just think it's not worth it. It's worth it to consider the possibility that you're wrong and acknowledge that and operate in the possibility that you're wrong. I also feel like I
always do. I'm always like, I'm probably wrong, but what I'm getting.
Yeah, because my perspective on this, I have to go here soon, but my perspective on this is that basically, if you have a tool that's right, even with 60% accuracy, you're better off with that than anything else, right? Because 60 is better than 50-50. And even if it's 50, it's not bad to explore using that tool set. So,
okay, well, Diego, stop talking about intuition because you have to go. But I want to ask you what everybody wants to know is, are you in a relationship?
No, I'm not, Erin. Why does everyone no one wants to know that?
No.
What's that?
Because I think people want to know if you're in a relationship. You're frozen too.
Oh, okay. No, yeah. I'm still single. I'm single since I was no longer with my partner of many years. She was amazing, and she's still alive. She is amazing. And no, I'm not in a relationship. I am still single. Yeah. I don't know that anyone really wants to know, but if they do want to know, that's what's going on. Focusing a lot on my career, I guess. There's someone I care about, and I've expressed that, and she's let me know that that's not in the cards, I guess. So
thank you for being honest. So one last question before you go.
Okay.
I wrote it down. Hold on 1 second. I always forget. What do you know about love? One thing, what do you know for sure?
It's work.
Ooh.
Yeah, my experience with filming this really profound couples therapist, Harville Hendricks, years ago in Abiquiu, New Mexico, he talks about that and just the work that it is to be in marriage and in a relationship, and that you don't run from it. It is work, and there are tools, and you have to have a willingness. You have to have a partner who's also willing to do the work with you, and it's work, and it's okay. You choose your partner every day. You choose who you're with. There's the power of choice, and that gal didn't say no forever. She just said kind of not now, which who knows, but I don't know why I had to say that. I did.
I'm glad you did. So let's go ahead and wrap up. And for anybody who might be listening or watching, we're chatting about whether or not to do season 2. If we do season 2, we're going to have more guests on that I think are really interesting and talk about spiritual warfare, talk about more life stories, we might bring some professionals on. Diego's finally talked me into being open to bringing professionals in to talk about relationships and trauma, maybe some intuition, maybe, I don't know, we've got a list of topics. If you would like for us to do a season 2, please comment or message us and let us know, because this is so much work. We enjoy it, but it is a lot of work. And again, I think you heard us in the beginning talk about why we started it. We just wanted to invite people into the conversations we're already having, and some difficult and deep conversations that maybe people are afraid to have. And through hearing us talk about it, might open up an avenue for them to start to share as well. Men sharing their stories of struggle, addiction, trauma, and roads to recovery there. We love that. Thank you for those men. Anything else, Diego?
I can't believe you had me talk about my relationship status.
People want to know. Give them what they want to know.
I'm somewhat of a good-looking guy. I've been told.
You're good. Yeah.
I'm not going to be full of myself, but I have been told of that on a few occasions. But thank you, Erin.
Very interesting and very sweet.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the project, and thank you, everyone, so much for participating, for listening, friends and family. Los quiero muchísimo. I love you all very much. Thank you for your time and your energy as we develop this project.
Do you have any last questions for me, Diego?
No. Well, real quick, do you regret doing this?
No, not at all. It was, I'm sure if we refilmed this episode, I would probably be able to be more open about those. It's always hard to know like how deep and how open to get, because like you're always thinking about, I don't want to hurt someone, or I don't want to say the wrong thing and then have people take it wrong. But I'm so thankful to have had the conversations that I got to have with my family. Those were, deep and very personal and important, I think. And hopefully that modeled something that maybe other people might need to do. And thankful for the guests that we didn't air, but came and shot with us anyway. That was a really special experience. And I forgot your question. I always go on all these tangents.
I'm grateful to you, Erin. Well, let's say goodbye to everyone, huh?
Okay, I'm going to do the outro. Bye. See you next time, maybe. Thank you, Diego. Bye.
Thank you so much.